She was born into slavery in Dorchester County, Maryland, in 1819. Her mother and father were pure-blood Africans, both of them slaves from the continent of Africa. Cornmeal was her main source of nutrition, along with meat whenever her father was allowed to hunt and fish. She slept as close as she could to the as possible to the fire on cold nights, and remember sticking her toes into smothering ashes to avoid frostbite. At the age of 6, she was considered old enough to work all day long and was rented out to a nearby family. She was whipped during her time there and sent back after eating one of the woman's sugar cubes. At the age of 12, she was injured by a slave owner when she refused to help tie up a slave who was trying to run away. The blow to her head would cause seizures and headaches at times for the rest of her life. She was 29 years old when she decided to risk her life and escape in Pennsylvania. The other slaves tried to discourage her and ask her, "What would you eat? And when it's dark, how would you know which way to go? How would you know which way is north?" She was determined. She slipped away in the night, and in 1849, she eventually made it to freedom. She would later say to her biographers, "I had crossed the line and I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land." With that, she got a job in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, saving every penny as she planned to return and rescue her family and friends. She would devote the rest of her life rescuing slaves from the South and leading them to freedom. Her name was Harriett Tubman, and she was considered one of the most fearless conductors along the what we know as the Underground Railroad. Her nickname was Moses. At one point, they put up wanted posters throughout Maryland and southward of a picture of her, and the reward was $50,000, and that was 150 years ago. She said, "I will fight for freedom so long as my strength lasts, and if the time came for me to go, the Lord would let me take me." Over the course of her daring escapes for slave hunters and dogs and wild animals, Harriett Tubman would eventually lead nearly 1,000 slaves to freedom. There's little surprise that to this day, Moses Harriett Tubman is held in high regard for what she did, and she's honored constantly for her selfless sacrifice that she took in going to help slaves have freedom. You know, this is something that we look up to people like this. It seems like Harriett Tubman had a divine destiny. She sacrificed for what she did and knew what was right and risked her life to save others. She had a destiny for God to do that. She was so successful, it had to have God's hand on it. You know, Harriett Tubman lived out her life of divine destiny. And today, with the book of Esther, we will see how we can discover our divine destiny if we submit to the will of God in those defining moments in our life. The title of today's sermon is Esther and the Unseen Hand of God, Part 4. A little background about where we are. How did we come to this point in chapter 4 of Esther? We talked about Xerxes. You know, Xerxes was the king of the Persian Empire. He was considered the king of kings. He was the king of far and near. He was the king of kings. This guy was somewhat, we would call him crazy. He was he was so self-absorbed that he considered himself to be like God. He was a man that you did not play with. He was a man of great power, and he lorded that power over all his kingdom. There's stories about Xerxes and how cruel he could be, and how he would impale people on poles and put their body parts on their way into the city so people could see that he did not play. King Xerxes, his kingdom reached modern-day Turkey and Iran and Iraq, Pakistan and Jordan, Lebanon and Israel and Egypt, Sudan, and Libya and Arabia. His kingdom was far and wide. His kingdom was a very rich kingdom. You know, there are stories about how his palace was so beautiful that we get our word paradise from just his palace name alone. He was very rich, and each year he would have all the providences and those who were under him bring gifts to him. And he would be tons and tons of gold and silver that he would take into the collection. You know, King Xerxes was so powerful and so rich that he had a 180-day party. We talked about that and how they had to party for 180 days. I mean, we party, but we don't party like that. And at the end of the party, this crescendo of the party, King Xerxes was going to call out the queen and to bear all her beauty for all those to see. They say that he wanted her to come out with no clothes on or just her crown. And she refused. Her name was Queen Vesti. She refused to come and bear her beauty to all the crowd. And in that embarrassing moment for the king, he sought counsel, and his councilmen said, "Oh, this is what we'll do. We'll put away Queen Vesti, and we will send out an edict to all the land that Queen Vesti has done all this." Instead of them keeping it quiet and keeping it right there, they broadcast this dissing of the king to all the provinces of all the lands of the King Xerxes. So they put away Queen Vesti. And then we talked about how Xerxes had a great war that he was planning. That was the main reason why he had this 180-day party. It was to get support of all those who were under him so he could go and invade Greece. And we talked about how he did invade Greece, and he tried. And he had a great battle with Greece, and he was defeated handily. And he went back to Persia with his tail between his legs, with a navy that was hardly intact. And he's down, and he's feeling bad, and he's lost this great battle, and he's not able to. He doesn't have his queen there anymore. So his counselors once again come up with another bright idea where they would have a kingdom-wide beauty contest to crown a new queen. And they do crown a new queen. But and this is where we are introduced to Mordecai, who is the cousin of Esther. But because Mordecai is older, he kind of looked at Esther as his daughter, and he raised her like a daughter. And they had a plan that they would keep their identity secret. Keep their identity secret and put Esther in this beauty contest so she could maybe become queen. And we read about how this contest was not, it was just really just a meat market. And how the king was just continually just sleeping with all these women and concubines. That it wasn't something that was something to be very proud of. But we also see that in God's hand, he can turn sour lemons into delicious lemonade. We also talked about how Esther had God's hand in her life, how he put her in places where she needed to be. He put people over her who could give her the right advice at the right time, and how she used that advice to advance, and how Mordecai was so happy
We talked about how after Esther became queen, Mordecai got to sit at the king's gate, and how that's like the administration building or a very prominent position in the kingdom. And so over the next 5 years, Mordecai had advanced in his job at the king's gate. And we also talked about Mordecai, while he was at the king's gate, discovered a plot to kill the king, and how Mordecai went and told Esther, and Esther told the king and gave Mordecai credit that that someone is trying to kill the king, and the plan was thwarted, and the king's life was spared. But we do also talked about how Mordecai was never rewarded for what he did for the king. And then that leads us to how things are going really well. And then one day Mordecai wakes up, and he doesn't want to keep the secret of being a Jew anymore. He's no longer ashamed of that. And all of a sudden, he's proud to be a Jew. The one thing that he wanted to keep secret so much, now he's standing tall as a Jew. And there's a man that comes through the gate named Haman, who rose to power very quickly in the kingdom of Persia, and how he rose so much and he had so much influence and power. When he walked through the king's gate, everybody at the king's gate, all these people who were prominent positions in the king's gate, had to kneel down to him. Not just kneel down out of some kind of courtesy, but it was almost in an act of worship. And Mordecai was the only one who would not kneel down. At first, he didn't get noticed, but then more and more people started to notice, and then they started to talk. And they told Haman, hey, there's Mordecai the Jew. Now he's identified himself as Jew. He's not kneeling down when you walk by. And Haman is infuriated. He's upset. And he has a great plan. And what he decided to do, that he would not only get Mordecai, but he would punish all of the Jews for what Mordecai did and was doing. And we also found out that his hatred for the Jews went beyond just what Mordecai did, that his whole family lineage and his people had been battling the Jews for generations upon generations, and that that they've been fighting the Jews for about 900 years. And so he knew who the Jews were, and he hated them. And so we talked about how he convinced the king to send out an edict that on the day before Passover, the Jewish Passover, that they would destroy and kill the Jews throughout the kingdom of Persia. And how he convinced him that, and the king gave him the signet ring, and the message went out through Pony Express, I guess you could say, throughout the whole kingdom. And that's where we are in the story. So let's look at chapter 4. Esther chapter 4. And this is after they have learned that Haman has sent out this edict to all the land that the Jews are going to be destroyed and killed on the day before the Passover. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city walls. Went out to the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter. So we see Mordecai now. We see more and more Mordecai identifying himself with God's people. Because what Mordecai is doing, I don't know if you ever seen this. Even to this day in modern day the Middle East, the way that they mourn a death, they really, they wail really. We in our society, we kind of keep things, handkerchief, but over in the middle, they wail out loud and they're crying and it's very loud and it's just very big. And so what we see here is Mordecai just wailing at the king's gate, very big. He's making a lot of noise. He's crying and he's drawing a lot of attention to himself. He takes off his normal clothes and he put on what we call sackcloth. It's kind of like what we call modern day burlap. It's something that you carry stuff in. And he puts on clothes made out of this. And not only do he put that on, it's all itchy and uncomfortable, he rips it. And that is a Jewish custom where when you're really showing mourning, and if you're showing grieving, or if you're trying to be repentant and then you have a sinful behavior, you rip your clothes in a showing of how you're inside and you're being ripped apart inside. And so he's mourning and he's making a big show about what's going on, and he's ripping these very uncomfortable clothes. And so he's wailing and wailing and wailing, and then he's saying that he's doing this in front of everybody. Everybody is noticing this. But not only is this kind of action going on there in the kingdom of Susa, or the palace, or the kingdom, or the headquarters of the king. In verse 3, you can see where even everybody, more people are wailing, and more people are mourning and putting on sackcloth. Look at verse 3. In every province to which the edict and the orders of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing. They lay in sackcloth and ashes. And so we see that Mordecai is not the only one who's having this behavior. Throughout the whole kingdom, all the Jews are wailing, and they put it on the sackcloth, and they cover themselves with ashes, and they're really putting on this a real big show of how they're feeling on the inside for all to see. And so this thing goes out, and everybody's crying and going upset. And then someone talks to Esther, and so Esther's, she's in the palace, and she's not with the normal subject of people. And someone comes to her, hey, don't you know your dad is outside in front of the king's palace, dressed in some funny clothes with dirt all over his head and face, and he's making a big to-do about this thing. And so Esther finds out about this, and she said, oh, what in the world's going on? So she wants Mordecai to come into her. So what she do? She know that you can't come into the king's palace dressed like that. So she sent some clothes for Mordecai to put on so she could talk to him. So she sends one of her trusted advisors down around verse 5, and she sends it to find out what's going on with this big ruckus with Mordecai. But Mordecai says, no, I will not, put on these other clothes. I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to be, wailing and crying and going on. And she's like, what in the world is going on? Now, you got to realize that she's in the palace, and she's probably sequestered off. And she probably doesn't know some of the happenings and goings-ons all about the kingdom. She's living the life of luxury. She has servants, and they bring in food, and it is really nice, and she's living the best of the best life. I mean, that's not uncommon for even in our today, is it? To have the rich and famous people kind of be out of touch with the commoners. You see. I remember one time, Oprah, who's on TV all the time, and she's very, very rich. And I was watching the show, and Oprah's like found out about Walmart, and she was like amazed at the prices at Walmart. You can get a pillow for under $150. And I was like, Oprah, who buys a pillow for $150? But she's aspired to such a level that $150 is nothing to her. But for us to buy a pillow for $150, but that's how out of touch you can become when you live the affluent life. So Esther's living the affluent life in this wonderful environment for her, and she doesn't know what's going on in the streets. And so she hears back that your dad is outside acting crazy. And she's like, my dad, and it had to be somebody and this is another thing. For her to send somebody out there that knew who he was, they had to be a very close confidant of Esther, meaning that they probably knew that Esther was a Jew. There's some of the scholars think that Esther, as she grew in prominence, put as many Jews around her as possible. And they all kept the secret because it was a secret that she was a Jew. They couldn't let that get out because, remember, in Persia, there were only like 5 to 7 families that you could have a queen pick from. And Esther wasn't even Persian, let alone in those 5 families. So it's a very secret that they had to keep very close. So Esther sends out clothes. Mordecai refuses him. And then for a little while, it comes back to her what is going on. And not only did the messenger come back with the news about Mordecai, but he came back with a wanted sign, a poster of the edict that all the Jews are going to be destroyed one day prior to the Jewish Passover. But they give the date and all, and she's surprised about this, and she's at a conundrum. She's like, what in the world is going on? Not only all the Jews are going to be destroyed, but her husband and the prime minister sent this edict out. And so she's thinking, what am I to do? How is this going to affect me? And so not only did she get this news about how the Jews are going to be destroyed, her dad cousin, Mordecai, in verse 8 says something that's going to really be a bombshell to her. He says, go in to the king and implore his favor and plead with him for your people. Go into the king and plead for your people. And so to her, she said, and she's living this life of luxury. She's saying, are you kidding me? For over 5 years, we've kept this thing a tight-knit secret. We've done, all this stuff so nobody knows that we're Jews, because it's not going to be looked at very kindly if people find out that we're Jews. And now you want me to go into the king to tell him to undo something that he and the prime minister did to save the Jews, and I'm one of them. Are you out of your mind? And so she's like, oh, let me send back a little message there. So verse 9, Harriett went back and it reported to Esther that Mordecai had said that she should instruct him. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner courts without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their life. Go back and tell Mordecai this little something. Nobody goes into the inner court. Nobody just shows up at the White House and goes into the Oval Office and start talking to President Obama. You just don't show up and do that. You might get dealt with. Does he know this little something? You go, I can see this. You go tell him, how they do. I said. Oh my goodness. And so she's like, and another thing, let me throw this little nugget of truth out there. She says, I'm not doing that well myself. Look at the end of verse 9. She says, and I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. She's saying, the Old Testament scholars think that Xerxes is kind of his feelings for, his interest in Esther is starting to fade and wane. She hadn't even seen him in 30 days. Now you want me to go into him? I got problems of my own. And I haven't seen the king for 30 days. And you want me to go in unannounced to talk to him about a people that needs to be saved, my people, diverging this secret that I am a Jew. Are you kidding me, Malachi? So if she's in between a rock and a hard place, if she remains silent, the edict will be carried out, and everyone, and Mordecai too, will be killed. And so she can't be quiet, but she can't speak up either. She's between a rock and a hard place. Not only that, she would be admitting to the king that I am a Jew, that I'm not Persian. And not only that, she would be putting the king in a situation where he's going to be incredibly humiliated and embarrassed that he didn't even know his own wife was a Jew. And that and not only that, people are going to start to think, is this king an idiot? Is he, does he not know his own wife? And so, this is not the man that you wanted to humiliate. This guy is evil. He's mean. He's vicious, and now he's going to be he's going to be humiliated if people find out that she's a Jew. He's going to be humiliated that he didn't know who she was, and people are going to say, "Oh, this he's an idiot. He wants to save face above all things." Remember what happened with when they lost the war to the Greeks. It was such a humiliating thing. He was depressed, and they had to put on a beauty contest to bring his spirits back. And so this guy is not one to be played with, but she is walking on thin ice. And then there is a bigger problem. There's a bigger problem here. Now remember that in order for you to see the king, you have to tell the king your business. And the person that you have to tell the business to is the prime minister. And the very person who is trying to kill you is the prime minister. So when she goes in, if I put it on the docket to see the king, it has to go through the prime minister who hates the Jews, hates me. And is he going to ever take my request to the king? Are we ever going to hear this on the docket? The very guy who's wanted us dead in the first place? So she's like, this is messed up. So she's there, and she's thinking it through. And then Mordecai, who anticipates her maybe coming back saying, nothing. He's trying to give Esther a perspective, an understanding that you can't just be quiet. That it's not good enough to just not say anything. You have to stand up and be counted. And so, while he is sitting there, just imagine Malachi sitting there, he's wailing, he's crying, and he is praying. They don't say he's praying, but he's praying. And not only Mordecai is praying, but all the Jews throughout the kingdom are. And this is a power and a testament to prayer. When everybody's praying in one accord, how things can happen. And he has to say something to change Esther's point of view, to change Esther's mindset, to get her to think on a bigger level, to think beyond herself. Look what he says in verse 12, which may be one of the greatest speeches of all the Bible. He says, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back to her this answer.
Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. See, let me break it down to you, honey child. Don't think and don't imagine for a moment that you're going to be safe in that palace and all the Jews are going to get massacred and nobody's going to find out your little secret. You know, you can't hide behind the curtain. You can't hide behind that crown. You can't hide behind all the beauty of the palace. You can't hide behind none of that because, you know, it's going to be found out. You can't, you know, not do anything. Let me get your attention with this statement here. He's saying, Malachi is saying, you need to shake it off and identify with who you are. You're one of God's people. You need to stand up for that. And this is new for him. Remember that he was one that told her to keep it a secret. And now he's standing up and he's crying out in public the Jewish customs. He's put on a sackcloth and ashes. He said, I identify with God. I identify with God's people. And he's saying, Esther, you need to do the same thing. Look at verse 14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. He's saying, Esther, it's it's your defining moment here. It's your defining moment. He's saying, you know, put your trust and throw your trust to God. Because if you don't help deliver the Jews, God is going to find a way to deliver the Jews. And when he delivers the Jews, he's not going to deliver you. You're not going to be a part of that deliverance. So, you know, get in line and fall and trust in God. We need to trust in God. This is your defining moment to stand up and be counted. This is your defining moment to stand up and be what God has created you to be. Look at the last part of verse 14. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. You know, they have these guys who get paid millions of dollars to be coaches. And they have to, you know, a team at halftime could be down and out. And they get in the locker room and the coach, he gives an inspiring speech. He gets into the heads and the minds of all his players to get them to deliver. And what Malachi is doing here is he's being a masterful deliverer of motivator for Esther. He raised her from a child. He knows who she is. He knows what buttons to push. He knows how to inspire. And he says, who knows that you haven't been called for just a time as this, to be in this position, to do this one great thing for God's people. Who knows? Esther, if you got to see this, it is not by accident that you became queen. All these things are lining up in your life and all these things are happening. It is not by accident. It's not by accident that I've sat at the city gate. It's not by accident that you all these things fall in place and you become the queen. It is God's hand in this thing. And you don't know if God has chosen you for this very moment to save his people. So you can imagine what's going on in Esther's mind. You can just imagine how she's there. You know, she thinks that I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be okay. I'm rich. I got influence. I got power. I got all these things going for me. I don't need to get involved. I'll be all right. But then, as Malachi talked to her more and more, she realizes, you know what? I'm not gonna be all right. You know, it's going to get out, and things are going to go from bad to worse. So I need to do something. So let's look at verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and
fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and he did as he was instructed. But look at the change. Look at the change of what went on. She went from, I don't want to talk, to maybe, yeah, wait a minute. And then he gets her attention to, if I perish, I perish. What changed in that time? What is it that changed? What she had to start to sit and realize that I am not here under my own power. That there's a greater hand in there. There's an unseen hand that put me here. And she goes back to what she knew what was right. She started to fast. She wanted other people to fast for her because she knew that this is a great and a scary situation that she's going into. So she needs all the help that she can possibly get. And she is identifying with, I am a Jew. Not only will I fast, but I'm going to have all my attendants fast with me. Meaning, why would they fast? That tells you that they probably were Jewish as well. They were probably a part of the group, that inner sanctum, her most trusted people. End of verse 16 says, I will go to the king, and even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. This was her defining moment. This was her defining moment. She went from fear to faith, from hesitation to determination. She was not concerned about her own safety, but the safety of all those who were her people. That is an amazing, amazing story to stop and to think about. In conclusion, we live with a sense. I want to ask the question: do we live with a sense of divine destiny in our life? Do we live with a sense of divine destiny that God is going to use us to do something, or God is going to be involved in our life in a way? Do we live with that divine destiny? It might be, your destiny may be a sink full of dishes, or it may be a classroom full of children, or it may be a shop full of tools, or a restaurant full of people, a cubicle full of paper. But do you live with a sense of divine destiny? Do you hear the small whispers of God in your life trying to urge you on to do something big? Because who knows that God hadn't put you in that position for a time such as this? We're called to do a great, great work for the benefit of the kingdom of God. Who knows that God hadn't planted us here in Matthews, North Carolina at the Fairfield Inn for a time such as this? Who knows that you're not sitting in this audience today out of divine destiny, that God has something intended for you? Who knows that the conversations you have are not affecting the kingdom of God forever and ever through your conversation with each other, with people that you meet? Do you sit in that position wherever you are? If you're in a job or you're retired, do you sit there and say that God has a plan for my life? And if I just can listen to the soft whispers of God, that I can hear his will for our life. Who knows that you haven't been called for a time such as this right now? We may not sit at the king's gate like Malachi. We may not be a queen like Esther. But make no bones about it, God's unseen hand is working out a work in our life. And who knows but that you have not come to this position in this life at this time to affect somebody in a profound, profound way. Today we covered Esther's defining moment. We covered her defining moment. And when we think about her defining moment, we have defining moments in our life as well. We have defining moments Little defining moments in our life that means big things. Sometimes the defining moments are not life and death situations, but there may be small defining moments. Those small moments in life, those small things in life that you stand up and be counted for who you are, that can affect and help people get through whatever they're going through. Maybe you can help them identify with who they've been supposed to be identifying with, and that is Jesus Christ. You know, we should all have our identity in Christ. That is our defining. Those are the destiny that we're looking forward to. When I think about, what we went through as a denomination, we had our identity in days. We had our identity in meats. We had our identity in all these other things. We let that define us. But what truly defined us is our fellowship and relationship with the Almighty great God, who sent His Son on a mission to become one of us. We're included because of Him. So let's look at our life and let's not say, oh, I'm just this and I'm just that. Let's look at our life and say, well, we have defining moments in our life. We have a divine destiny in our life. And wherever we are, we can affect those around us, just like Esther and Mordecai affected all those who are around them in Persia. Please bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so very much for who you are. We thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who has made our life important, God. God, we can affect all eternity through the life choices that we make, for those who we come in contact with, for those who we share the very love that is boiling up in us. God, thank you for that great mission. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your wonderful body. God, I ask that you please help us to realize that we have a divine destiny, that our destiny is no less important than Esther and Mordecai's, that we are important when we are participating with you and doing the things and doing your will in our life. God, give us ears to hear your will. Give us ears to hear that small whisper, Lord, as you try to nudge us and guide us and point us in the direction that you want us to go. Thank you so very much for all that you've done. Help us to realize that your unseen hand is moving and shaking in our world, not only on the big stage, but the small stages of our life, Lord. Thank you for it all, Lord, and we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.